So now that we have the magazine apart, it's time to get down to the cleaning process. And the order is not particularly important. I usually start with the body of the magazine, and this is where being able to sort of look through the magazine body with the paper towel background helps you to examine the dirt that's accumulated. This one's I've seen a lot worse, but there's definitely fouling. It tends to build up primarily in the front here, so you need to scrub that out. And this is sort of, I can feel the sort of waxy lubricant, and it helps to sort of scrape up. It tends to accumulate in the front where the metal is sort of rounded over. And what I like to do is to clean it as best I can with a dry swab, and then go over it with a swab with some of the COP on it. That helps to provide a film. The bodies are stainless, they're not going to rust on you, but I find that it helps to make it a little easier to clean them in the future if there's a thin coating of lubricant on them. The fouling also tends to, the base of the magazine doesn't fit tightly in these grooves here, so fouling can fall down in there. Mostly you want to get it off the body of the magazine as best you can, and of course off the inside. One of the things that the toothpicks are good for, the swab doesn't get into the back corners very well, and it's a good idea to take a toothpick and scrape where the rim of the cartridge goes. I don't know if you can see the bit of black that I just dug out, and then on the other side. And you can also run it down the corners in the back to knock loose any dirt that you can. Because of the sort of rib design at the sides, it can be a little bit tricky to sort of get everything out of there. But again, if you've got the light background, you can easily see where there's fouling that needs to be removed. One of the other things that's good to do at this time is to take a general look at the body of the magazine. Again, I'm not sure how well you can see it, but the hole for the roll pin here, the metal has been distorted a little bit. It's not too bad on this side, but it's definitely bent up, and that's where having the flat jaw pliers come in handy. You can press that back down. This one's not too bad, but sometimes I think the factory hammers them together when they're not quite aligned, and it can bend it up to the point where it's much harder to get the base on and off of the magazine. So this is all clean as far as the bulk of the fouling is concerned. I won't bore you with going over it with the lubricant. We'll move on to the other stuff, and I'll do that before the next segment. The roll pin generally doesn't need much attention. It's kind of not where it gets very dirty. The follower will typically have a lot of fouling on it. There's some on the top here. There's some that's built up on the front and the base here. The underside usually isn't too bad, but you basically want to get as much of that off as you can. You can use cotton swabs. A scrap of paper towel is useful. Just sort of go over the whole thing. The fouling doesn't stick too bad to the plastic. And get it out of the corners, off the back. Another thing to look for, The back of the follower is frequently sort of sanded flat to remove any mold imperfections. Sometimes there'll be a little blip of a sprue sticking out, and it's not a bad idea to shave that off so that the follower has the full range of motion it was designed for. So that's not too bad there. And another thing to keep an eye on is wear on the follower. The Benelli magazine has a groove that's offset to the right for the rim of the bottom cartridge. When that round feeds up to the top of the magazine forces that round so that it's centered before it gets pushed out of the magazine. And that causes a lot of wear on the left-hand corner of that offset groove. And if that wears down a lot, you may start having problems with the, it basically means the rim of the rear cartridge is lower than it might ordinarily be, and that may affect the feeding of the last round. The magazine button usually doesn't need a lot of attention. It's sometimes a certain amount of dirt can build up in the groove, and I put a little bit of the CLP on a paper towel and spin it around to try to clean that out. You can see that I got some gunk out of that, and also having a little bit of oil there should help it operate more smoothly when we put everything back together again. The base of the magazine can accumulate quite a bit of debris as it falls down inside. You frequently have wax that's built up or lube that's built up on the top edges here where it kind of gets compressed in when the magazines are loaded. This looks like it's had mostly powder fouling. There's not too much bullet lube in here. And just give it a good general scrubbing out. Now, one of the things that you can run into that makes it harder to put the magazine together and may explain why it was a little difficult to take apart is when I'm not quite sure if they mold these with the front roll pin in place or if they have a dummy pin in the mold. It's probably a dummy pin, but there's mold flashing that can be present right on either end of the roll pin in the front of the magazine, and that's right where the slot in the body, this slot here, has to seat. And it can make the magazines much easier to take apart in the future and put back together if you can remove that flashing. That requires getting that roll pin out, and this is where having a bench block is handy. Ideally, you don't have to tap it all the way out. And again, you'll use the roll pin punch and a small mallet. And they're usually not too tight. And again, if you can keep the orientation the same and just drive it most of the way out. So that you can get your X-Acto knife. And what you want to do is basically scrape off the excess plastic on either end of the hole. And I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little piece of plastic flashing there. So that looks pretty good. And about half the time that I try to do this, I accidentally end up pushing the roll pin all the way out. And the thing that you want to check, the roll pin is not perfectly cylindrical, and the orientation can affect how well it fits in the slot. So it's a good idea to put the magazine slot onto the roll pin. And for example here, it doesn't fit very well if it goes on straight. But if I rotate it slightly, it fits much more easily. So you can use the body of the magazine to rotate the roll pin so that it goes on fully into the slot without putting up a fight. And at that point, you can put it back in place, tap it in so it's recessed about the same on both sides. And that will make things much easier in the future. That looks good. Okay, so we've got most of the bits cleaned up except for the spring. Grab a scrap of paper towel. I like to fold it over a couple times, put some of the CLP on it. I fold it over again so I have kind of a thick cushion. And then basically you want to punch through the paper towels with the spring and then wind it through the oiled towel to clean all of the powder off and give it a coating of oil. It has some sort of, I think probably a lacquer finish. So I've never seen them get too rusty, but a little bit of oil shouldn't hurt. And again, you want to try to keep track of which end is which. If I start with the top end, it usually tears a piece of paper towel off, so I can make sure that I know which end is up when I'm done. So at that point, we have all of the bits and pieces cleaned, and you can see that the spring has got a bit of a curve to it, and that can, in extreme cases, affect sort of how smoothly things feed. So that takes care of the cleaning process.